Picture this. You are sitting down to play basically the most complicated high-stakes board game ever invented.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right. And there are millions of moving pieces. The board covers an entire subcontinent. And the results of the game literally determine the future, the safety, and, the prosperity of over 1 billion people.
Wow. No pressure?
Exactly. But you sit down at the table, you look at all these pieces, and you flat out refuse to read the rules.
Well, I mean, you'd be playing completely blind at that point.
Right.
Yeah, any move you make would just be arbitrary. And more importantly, you wouldn't understand why your opponents, or even your allies for that matter, are making their moves. The whole game would just collapse into chaos.
And that is the exact scenario you face if you attempt to step into the administrative machinery of India without understanding its foundational rulebook.
Absolutely.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are talking directly to you, the student. If you are preparing for competitive exams, like the UPSC, SSC, or state PSCs, you already know Indian polity is this massive make-or-break subject.
It's arguably the most critical area of the syllabus.
Yeah, but we need to establish why testing agencies weigh it so heavily. I mean, they aren't just asking you to memorize a phone book of legal clauses for the sake of, bar trivia.
No, not at all. These agencies are recruiting you to operate the very machinery of the state. They need to guarantee that you actually understand the user manual of that machinery.
Right, because you're not just taking a test, you're stepping into a role.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. If you are going to be a district magistrate or a police commissioner or a revenue officer, you are going to be wielding immense power over citizens' lives.
And they need to know you won't abuse it.
Precisely. The testing agencies need to know that you understand where that power comes from, how it's distributed, and crucially, where it stops. Understanding the Constitution it's about understanding the actual logic of the Indian state.
Which brings us to the real mission of today's deep dive. We are taking the presentation notes from an Indian Polity Master series on the concept of Constitution, and we're stripping away the rote memorization.
We want to get to those toppers nuances.
Yes. Uncovering the deep mechanisms, the real whys of the document. So let's just jump right in. To understand the rules of the game, we first have to agree on what a constitution actually is, really.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that depending on who you ask, the answer changes entirely. There are essentially 3 distinct faces to this document.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So starting with the perspective of the legal mind, to a lawyer, the Constitution is the fundamental law of the land. It's the apex predator of the legal ecosystem.
Oh, I like that. Apex predator. Meaning any other law that conflicts with it just gets devoured.
Exactly. And we see this mechanically in Article 13 of the Indian Constitution, which basically acts as an automatic kill switch.
Wait, how does the kill switch work exactly?
Well, it explicitly states that any law inconsistent with fundamental rights is void. So a legislature could pass a bill with unanimous support, but if it violates that fundamental law, the court uses Article 13 to just erase it. It establishes an absolute hierarchy.
Right, so that's the lawyer's view. What's the second phase?
The second perspective belongs to the political scientist. They zoom out from the courtroom and look at the state as, an organism.
Okay.
To them, the Constitution is the system that organizes, distributes, and limits political power. It's the structural engineering of the government.
Structural engineering. Got it. And the third perspective, I'm guessing that brings it down to the everyday citizen.
You got it. For the public, the Constitution is the identity card of the nation. It reflects a society's values and its highest aspirations.
Like the preamble, right. You don't need a law degree to read that.
Exactly. It's a philosophical statement of who the nation aspires to be, promising justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity.
So when you combine those 3 faces, the legal foundation, the structural engineering, and the national identity, what are the actual day-to-day jobs of the document?
Well, the sources outline 4 core jobs. First, it has to physically establish the organs of the state. It invents a legislature to write laws, an executive to enforce them, and a judiciary to interpret them.
Standard Civics 101 stuff.
Right. Second, it distributes power horizontally across those 3 branches so no one gets a monopoly, and vertically, slicing power between the central government and the states.
Okay, making sure everyone stays in their lane. What's the third?
Third is mapping out the relationship between the state and the citizen. That's where fundamental rights are drawn. And the fourth, which is probably the most crucial, is limiting the government.
Okay, wait, I need to push back on this a little.
Better go for it.
I'm stuck on this idea of limiting the government. If we look at this from the perspective of a developing nation or even just an administrator trying to get things done, the government needs immense power. Right. It has to build massive infrastructure, manage the economy, lift millions out of poverty. If state capacity is so desperately needed, why is the most highlighted feature the mechanism that stops it from acting?
It does seem counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels like building a powerful engine and then just obsessing over the brakes.
Well, that is the central tension of political science. You need an engine powerful enough to move the vehicle, but without brakes, that vehicle is just a missile.
Oh, wow. Just a missile.
Exactly. History provides endless examples of state machinery being weaponized against the very public it was built to serve. A government with unchecked power is the literal definition of tyranny.
Right, so the limitation is a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. Every single action taken by a government official is only legitimate because the Constitution permits it. By defining what the state can do, it draws a hard boundary around what it cannot do. Limiting power is the vital leash that prevents subjugation.
That concept of the leash is such a great mental model. And since the Constitution acts as this essential leash, exams love to test students on how different countries manufacture it, right?
Oh, absolutely. Examiners frequently set traps around these definitions. Let's look at the classic binary they use, written versus unwritten constitutions.
Okay, so the standard textbook definition is pretty straightforward. A written constitution is a single, consolidated document enacted on a specific date, like the USA in 1787.
Right. And India's 1949 document holds the record for the sheer volume of text.
Yeah, it's massive. And then the unwritten constitution is framed as this organic evolution. It's not a single booklet. It's a sprawling collection of customs and judicial rulings piled up over centuries, like the UK, New Zealand, or Israel.
That's the textbook definition, yes. But here is the topper's nuance. The trick examiners use to filter out average candidates.
Ooh, tell us.
No constitution is purely written, and no constitution is purely unwritten. Those labels only describe the dominant character of the system.
Wait, really? So the UK has a written constitution?
Well, it has incredibly important written components. You have the Magna Carta from 1215, the Bill of Rights from 1689, and modern statutes like the Constitutional Reform Act of 2005. The British system relies heavily on enacted texts.
That makes total sense. And the inversion must be true for India, then.
Exactly. India has the lengthiest written constitution in human history, but the day-to-day governance relies on massive unwritten conventions.
Can you give an example? What's an unwritten rule in India?
The best example is the position of the prime minister. The unwritten convention dictates that the prime minister must be the leader of the majority party in the Lok Sabha.
Right. That's just how parliamentary democracy works.
It is. But if you scour the text of the Constitution, you will not find a clause explicitly mandating that the president must appoint the majority leader.
Are you serious? It's not written down.
It's an enforced political reality, a convention, not a written legal code. If the president appointed someone without a majority, the government would just immediately collapse during a confidence vote.
So it's basically like a family recipe versus a published cookbook.
A family recipe? I like that. How do you mean?
Well, the UK is the unwritten family recipe. It's passed down, tweaked by different generations. Maybe someone wrote down a few measurements centuries ago, like the Magna Carta. But the true recipe lives in the habits of the family.
Right.
Whereas the US and Indian constitutions are formal published cookbooks.
Hmm.
But even with a 400-page published cookbook, the chef still relies on unwritten kitchen techniques, like that Prime Minister Majority Convention, to actually get the meal made.
That is a perfect analogy. The distinction isn't about whether pen ever touched paper. It's about whether the system was deliberately enacted at a specific moment, or if it just organically evolved.
Which naturally leads to how these systems handle change. Because societies evolve, right? The rules have to adapt. This introduces the second major exam trap: rigid versus flexible constitutions.
Yes, and this binary is entirely about the mechanics of amendment. How hard is it to change the rules?
So in a rigid system, constitutional law is elevated way above ordinary law. You can't just alter it like a routine tax bill. You need supermajorities, like in the US, or direct referendums, like in Australia.
Exactly. The hurdle is intentionally high. A flexible constitution, on the other hand, puts constitutional law and ordinary law on the exact same level.
Like the UK Parliament, right? Yeah. They can alter their constitutional makeup with a single majority vote.
Yes, using the exact same process they'd use to regulate, say, agriculture.
But India doesn't neatly fit into either box, does it?
No, and that's the brilliance of it. The framers deliberately rejected both extremes. They engineered a blended system that utilizes three different mechanisms depending on what part of the rulebook you want to change.
Okay, let's break down those three tiers because this is super high yield for exams.
Sure. First, some administrative parts can be altered by Parliament with a simple majority, operating outside Article 368. It allows for routine housekeeping.
Makes sense. Keep the everyday stuff flexible. And the second tier.
For more significant changes, Article 368 kicks in. This requires a special majority, usually 2/3 of the members present and voting in both houses.
And then there's the third mechanism, which is the rigid one.
Right. If an amendment alters the federal structure, meaning it messes with the power dynamic between New Delhi and the states, it needs that special majority in Parliament, plus formal ratification by at least half of the state legislatures.
That is so crucial. The central government cannot just unilaterally strip power away from the regional governments. By forcing half the states to agree, you physically force a national consensus.
Exactly. It protects the states from being bulldozed. The framers understood that if Constitution is too flexible, it's just a weather vane spinning with every political breeze.
But if it's too rigid, it becomes a straitjacket.
Right, a straitjacket that tears when society outgrows it. India's blend gives you stability and a safety valve.
Okay, so we've established what the rulebook is, how it's woven, and how it can be changed. But what happens if the government simply ignores the rules?
Now we're getting into the deep end.
Right, because you can own a perfectly engineered document, but that doesn't mean the government respects it. And this brings us to the ultimate paradox and an absolute favorite trick question for UPSC examiners.
You're talking about the gulf between having a constitution and practicing constitutionalism.
Yes, because owning a cookbook doesn't make you a chef. What is the actual difference here?
Well, it is the most vital distinction in political science. A constitution is simply a noun. It is a document on paper. Almost every modern state has one.
Okay, a noun.
But constitutionalism is a verb. It is the active philosophy of limited government. It means the state's behavior is actually restrained by those rules. No ruler is above the law.
So, a government of laws and not of men. The source notes use a really chilling example for this. The Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin.
It is the ultimate cautionary tale. If you look at the text of the 1936 Stalin Constitution, it reads like a masterclass in progressive governance.
Really? What did it say?
It guaranteed universal suffrage, the right to work, the right to rest, freedom of the press, and freedom of assembly. The text was impeccable.
But the reality was, well, Stalin's USSR.
Exactly. The Great Purge, the gulags, total authoritarian control. They had a constitution, but they possessed absolutely zero constitutionalism.
The document was basically just wallpaper.
Yes. The ruling party controlled all the enforcement mechanisms, so the rights on paper meant nothing. The state was completely unbound by the text.
That behavioral gap is terrifying. So if constitutionalism is behavioral, how do we actually measure it? What's the specific checklist examiners use to see if a country is really practicing it?
The field generally relies on 7 specific elements. And for a candidate, the key is understanding how the Indian Constitution legally anchors each one.
Okay, let's run that diagnostic on India. Element 1 is popular sovereignty, right? The idea that authority flows up from the citizens, not down from a ruler.
Right. And in India, the legal anchor is the very first phrase of the preamble. We, the people. It establishes the public as the ultimate source of legitimacy.
Element 2 is the rule of law.
Anchored by Article 14, it explicitly guarantees equality before the law. The executive cannot invent separate rules for its friends versus its enemies.
Then element 3 is the separation of powers, which we talked about, horizontally distributing authority. What's element 4?
Fundamental rights. In India, these are detailed in Part 3 of the Constitution. But as we learned from Stalin, rights are meaningless without enforcement.
Which is where Article 32 comes in.
Exactly. The right to constitutional remedies. It allows a citizen to go directly to the Supreme Court if their fundamental rights are violated. It's a direct mechanism to pull the leash.
That's huge. And that direct access builds into element 5, judicial review. You need a judiciary with the teeth to actually strike down government actions.
Yes. And in India, this power was permanently cemented in 1973 with the Kesavananda Paradi case.
Oh, the basic structure doctrine. This is legendary in Indian polity.
It really is. It was an existential battle. Parliament essentially wanted the authority to amend any part of the Constitution, even fundamental rights.
But the Supreme Court stepped in, right?
They did. They ruled that while Parliament can amend the document, It absolutely cannot destroy its fundamental architecture, things like democracy, secularism, and judicial review itself.
So the judiciary basically built an unhackable firewall. Even if a party wins a massive supermajority, they legally cannot vote to turn India into a dictatorship.
That's exactly right. The basic structure doctrine is the ultimate enforcement mechanism for constitutionalism in India.
Which brings us to the final two elements, free elections and accountability. Because power in a constitutional system is never owned, it's rented.
Held on a renewable lease from the public, and to prevent the government from rigging that lease renewal, India relies on Article 324 establishing an independent election commission.
So on paper and in institutional design, India clearly has all 7 elements. But we have to be objective here. Constitutionalism isn't always perfect in practice.
No, it's not. And we cannot discuss this without examining the emergency from 1975 to 1977.
Right. During those 21 months, the government used an emergency provision to suspend civil liberties and jail opponents.
The text of the Constitution was used to essentially suspend the practice of constitutionalism. The machinery of the state was unleashed without its usual restraints.
It's the ultimate proof that constitutionalism is an ongoing behavior. It's not a trophy you win and just leave on a shelf. The institutions only work if people actively maintain the leash.
And the subsequent democratic restoration after the emergency highlighted the resilience of the Indian electorate. It shows why understanding these mechanisms is so vital. You aren't just memorizing rules, you're inheriting a hard-won system of checks and balances.
And for you, the student listening, this is how you elevate your prep. It's a total mindset shift. You aren't just memorizing article numbers to fill in bubbles on a test.
No, you're learning the structural engineering of the world's largest democracy.
When you understand the why it takes half the states to ratify a federal change, how unwritten conventions stabilize the Lok Sabha, the gap between a paper document and actual limited government, you stop thinking like a test taker.
You start thinking like an administrator.
You understand the underlying strategy of the board game.
And to solidify that mindset, I want to leave you with a challenge straight from the study material.
All right, what's the homework?
The next time you sit down to study polity, close your books. Try to explain out loud, in under 60 seconds, exactly why Stalin's USSR had a constitution but possessed absolutely zero constitutionalism.
Force yourself to articulate that gap between a list of rights and actual enforcement. If you can explain that out loud, you are thinking exactly like a top-tier candidate.
You've mastered the foundational logic of the state.
Keep that in mind the next time you look at the complex board game of Indian polity. The real power isn't just in the pieces. It's in understanding the invisible leash that controls them. Good luck with your preparation,